Hello and welcome to this month's painting tutorial. This month I'm going to isolate this subject matter and just talk about how to paint skies in watercolor. We're going to cover a couple of different types of skies, beginning with a typical cloudy day, really well-defined cloud edges. Now the first step is to give yourself some clear guidelines for where the clouds are supposed to go. Once I've defined the upper and lower limits of the cloud, then I can add some more details to it. Now as for painting the clouds, I can protect the whites of the clouds with Misket or Frisket film, I can paint around them, or I can paint over the top of them and sponge them out. Each technique is going to give you really different edges, so I'm going to do all three on this piece of paper and show you what I mean. So on this side of the paper I'm going to protect my cloud edges with masking fluid. So I'm going to wait for this masking fluid to dry and then I'll come back to it. Alright, that Frisket is all dry now. So I'm going to paint the sky over the top here and over the top of these and have my cloth ready to blot those out. And I'm going to start at the top, work my way down, and I'm working on making a gradiated wash. Now I've got to work a little bit quickly or else those colors are going to dry and I won't be able to blot out my clouds. And I still need to protect that edge, so you go slow and fussy around the edges, speed it up for everywhere else. Then before this paint has a chance to dry too much, I'll go back and I'll blot out the clouds that I painted over the top of. Now obviously there are a few drawbacks to this. Number one being that you can't see the clouds that you drew, so you just have to guess. Another drawback, potentially, is that the whites that I blot out are never going to be as bright as the whites that I protect. But it's still pretty impressive how bright they are. And then you can try to scrub out some of those that got a little bit too dry, and then re-blot that newly wetted surface, and that works pretty well too. Okay, then I'm going to intensify these blues that are surrounding this cloud that I'm painting around here. And now here you see the problem that you can run into when the dry meets the wet. In order to solve that, or at least minimize, you have to paint over the top of the rest of that dry paint to get a nice even coverage. Before it dries completely, I want to soften some of the edges in this hard cloud, and to do that I'm going to take a angled shader and get it damp and just pull out a few of these little fussy shapes on the cloud. You can see how it has a soft edge in places and a hard edge in others. Okay, and I just tap 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 like this and blot them dry. And that's how I'm going to get the broken little cloud patterns that exist around the edge, and also how I'm going to break up that edge and get it soft at some places and keep it hard in others. This is our three types of clouds after I've taken some time to soften the edges. So now I'm going to remove the masking fluid from these on the left. They're a little bit too stark. They don't look realistic at this point. So the next step here would be to go back with that same flat shader and soften these edges as well. What I can also do is to get a smaller flat and add a layer of shading to the clouds. So I can mix up a shadow color and then carefully avoid the edges of the cloud and paint that shadow color right over the top like this. I'm looking to paint it on in one big piece, and then I'll give it a little bit of variation by going back, adding some water here and there to soften some edges and make them bleed, and then I get just a nice mottled realistic shadow effect like this. You can do that same thing to those clouds that I protected with the masking fluid. And you can also do it to the clouds that you blotted out. I'll go off camera one last time, do the final touch-ups working that same way, and then I'll come back and show you the finished result. Okay, here are 3 types of clouds finished up, and you can see that they all give you a different look. Probably the best for this type of cloud would be either of these two. Blotting out just isn't going to give you a bright enough edge. And what really gives you the realism here is that bright edge contrasted with the shadow shapes. So that's 3 different ways that you can paint fluffy clouds in a blue sky. But that's only one type of sky. We can paint a foreboding sky like this in a much different style. First of all, you determine where you want hard edges, because the basic principle of watercolor is wet on wet will give you a soft edge or a bleed, wet on dry will give you a hard edge. So here, there's a hard edge down here, and other than that, it's soft, soft, soft. So I'm going to prepare by sketching out where I want those hard edges to be. Then I'm going to get a large flat and wet down the rest of my board. Okay, then I'm going to mix up a nice puddle of darks. Then I'll just start in the darkest corner and add the color to the darkest places first. And down here, I've got this blue swath here. And I'm pretty much letting those colors mix on the board. So I'll add more water, holding the paper at an angle, and let that streak down. Then down here, I'll just mix some different colors into my wet paint. So I just have to add a little bit more color down in this bald spot in the middle, right about here. And then try to just touch it down and leave it alone. It might not look exactly like your photo reference, but right now the sky is fresh and interesting, and it works. So it doesn't necessarily have to look just like the picture in order to work. Okay, so that's a good stopping point for that one. I'll move to a different piece of paper and show you how to make a colorful sky like what you would see for a sunset. Okay, now sunsets come in all different colors, and depending on the angle of the sun and the atmospheric conditions, you're going to get all kinds of different effects. But I'm just going to show you the basic technique of mixing your different colors right on the board. I'm going to begin by just spraying down my paper to get all of those colors nice and fluid. I'll start with a blue sky up here in the corner. It's a sky that hasn't been touched by the sunset colors yet. The next thing you need to be aware of when you're painting a sunset is where the sun is placed. The sun itself is going to be white, the area around it is going to be yellow, and then the other colors will occur around those. So I'll take a yellow, mix into it with an orange. On top of that, I'll add a deeper red. And I'm just working wet on wet, getting plenty of color on the paper so that it doesn't fade away on me when it dries. Go into that with some purples. And then I'm just going to move the board, tilting it back and forth to get those colors to mix. Alright, you can also use a spray bottle or a squirt bottle filled with clean water. Spray that over the top and get some more water on the paper that way. You can't really tell how it's going to look until you let it dry and come back to it. So I'll go ahead and let that happen next. And then show you the final result. Now, if we go back to that stormy sky, the only thing that I want to add here is a little bit of these dark storm clouds that are on the foreground. So I'm going to grab a dark color on my flat, and then I will just use the edge of the brush and fill that shape right in on the board like this. These are my little stormy storm clouds. You can use a clean paper towel and just blot enough of the upper edge to make it kind of mottled and interesting. But for the most part, you just want to put down the paint and let it be. That is one of the hardest lessons to learn in watercolor. Thankfully, it's also one of the easiest to do. It doesn't take anything to just stop painting. Alright, here's that sky after it's had a chance to dry. Obviously things would change once you put the land in there, but I like it. And now you know the basic process at any rate, so whether or not you like this particular sky, you can apply the principles to make whatever you want. Here's the sunset sky. Once again, you might not like how this particular one turned out, but just practice the technique. If there are blooms that you don't like that show up, you can get rid of those. Sometimes it can be a little bit touch and go, but if you just dampen a flat shader, you can rub those bloom streaks off and get them to the point where they're not completely gone, but they won't be noticeable to anybody but you. So there you have it, 3 basic skies that you can paint in watercolor. I hope that you've learned something about painting skies, that you won't be afraid to try it out in your own studio, where I'm sure you will teach yourself much more than I ever could. Improvement in painting really does come down to just buckling down, getting the paint on paper, and doing it over and over and over again. So thank you for joining me. Don't forget to join me next month for another drawing and painting tutorial. Thanks so much for watching.